Welcome to Backpacker Radio, presented by The Trek. I am your co-host, Zach Badger Davis, and sitting to my bottom right is...
Hi, I'm Giuliani Chauncey, aka Chaunce.
Chaunce, question of the day. What is a movie that inspires you or has inspired you to get outside?
I think like any of those documentaries that Jimmy Chin makes. Like, what was it? I think he was in Maru. He did a bunch of the Alex Honnold ones, like the Free Solo. He didn't make it, but I think he was in Valley Uprising. All those are like climbing ones, but they're all just like super cool to watch. And then you finish them and you're like, shoot, I should go try to do something outside.
Yeah, that's a good one. Maru was excellent. I think that's my second favorite outdoor documentary that I've seen. Dunwall being number one. I'm going to go with something that is not necessarily as in your face, but I really love The Revenant for its cinematography. Chauncey is making
makes you want to get outside. That makes you want to go sit by a fire.
Which is outside? Or are you saying an indoor fireplace?
It makes it cold.
Oh, it's just it's so beautifully shot, and knowing the story for how anal the director was about the times a day and the exact settings that he would film, I think really enhances the story of that movie. But yeah, I know the movie is tense, like you're on edge and you're going to be constipated for a week after watching that movie, but it's just so visually stunning that it makes me want to get outside and backpack.
Did I ever tell you how my mom thought it was a Christmas movie?
I think we've talked about this, but refresh my memory.
My brother got it as like one of the DVDs he wanted for Christmas one year, and my mom wanted us to find a movie to watch that night. And she was flipping through the DVDs he got, I think, and she saw the snow on the cover, and she was like, "Ooh, let's watch this one." And I was like, "Okay." And we're like sitting in the living room while like Leonardo's climbing into a horse.
Yeah. How'd your mom handle that one?
I think she liked it.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's a little bit gory, but I guess I don't know your mom's aversion level to gore.
No, I don't think she likes gore, but she definitely didn't complain. Maybe she just likes Leo.
Yeah, who doesn't? Anyways, last bit of house cleaning before we get to today's interview. Chauncey and I occasionally Clubhouse, which is a verb because it is an app, a new app. If you're on Clubhouse, follow us at Zach.Davis and at Giuliani Chauncey. That's your handle, right?
Yes.
I'm envious that you have a name that is not highly competitive. I can't get my name on any handle. And the fact that I even got a version of it on this new app, I felt very special about it.
Yeah, I think there's been like one or two instances where my name was taken and I was like shocked, like really almost offended.
What is Chauncey? What's the what country does that derive from?
Originally France. There was this guy Chauncey the Chauncey that lived in this town in France called Chauncey, but there was no E. It was just Chauncy. And then he moved to England, and then like they just like stayed in England for a long time, so a lot of the French got washed out. And then they got sent over to America in the 1600s. So here we are.
Chauncey the Chauncey sounds like a rap name. Yeah. And then last little bit, for anyone listening that doesn't even know what Clubhouse is, I feel like it's very big in like the entertainment world / tech world, but not necessarily. I don't think it's like bled into the outdoor industry quite yet. It is essentially, how do you describe it? Talk radio, but an app. It's live podcasting. There you can have schedules, but there's basically rooms where there can be kind of serendipitous confluences of people speaking on the same subject. Sort of a strange thing to try to give an explanation to, especially because I haven't used it a ton myself, aside from being on the host end of the spectrum. But yeah, I feel like it's talk radio through an app.
It's also like kind of Snapchatty in that it doesn't save the recordings, which is kind of nice because the last one we did, we like spent an unusual large amount of time discussing how to tell if a watermelon's ripe.
It's true. And knowing that it's not being recorded, I feel like you can speak a little bit more freely because you're not going to be you're not going to have your ass held over the flame if you say something dumb, as I'm
Oh,
doing right now. So we should just get to our interview.
yeah, never mind. Go ahead.
Okay, let's get to today's interview. It is with Eric Giuliani. Did I say it correctly?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, thank you.
Any relation to the other Giuliani?
No, absolutely not. No.
Okay. His bio. At 34, Eric set out to travel the world without flying. He quit his corporate job and traveled across all 7 continents, starting from Cape Town, South Africa. He traveled nearly 70,000 miles using mostly public transit and the bartering of his skills as a writer, filmmaker, and photographer. First and foremost, Eric, thank you so much for reaching out and an excellent Backpacker Radio guest pitch.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate you guys having me on. I've been looking forward to this.
Likewise. So yeah, we don't have to start at the very beginning of your life, but I do want to start at kind of the onus for the inspiration for the bulk of what we're going to talk about in the interview here. Your 70,000 mile traveling adventure. So kind of take us to where you think the beginning of that story starts.
Yeah, so I was, at the time, I think I was 31, 32-ish years old, and I had kind of, finished school and grad school, kind of, did the normal thing, got a job, but, and we've heard it a lot probably in this industry, which is I had a corporate career, but I really hated what I was doing, to be perfectly honest, but I had no idea what it was that I really wanted to do. And so the moment this really started for me was kind of being honest, right? And saying, okay, I really don't like my corporate career. The job looked really good on paper. I was an educational consultant and I was teaching teachers and I was living in South Beach, and it was a pretty flexible job because I was working from home and traveling to schools and working with teachers and students, but it was just very repetitive. And so that kind of aha moment of like just being brutally honest with myself and saying, all right, if there's one thing you could do with your life, it could be anything in the world. Like, it sounds super cliche, but what would it be? And I had always loved traveling, and like most of us, that's just was a real passion of mine. So I had always traveled as a hobby, but there was more to it. I wanted to just travel. I wanted to travel, but I also wanted to like tap into something job-wise that would make me fulfilled and make me feel different than how I was feeling with my current job. So what I did was, all right, what are like the creative things that I've never done that I've always wanted to do? And so that answer kind of came back in threefold, which was, okay, I want to be a travel writer, I want to be a photographer, and a travel filmmaker. And I'm going to try to learn these things. And then I'm going to try this crazy idea, this impossible idea, which is, let me try to go around the whole world without flying. And so it was kind of in that moment when all these ideas were kind of like surfacing in my, in my mind, if you will, that was kind of the beginning of this journey. And then there was a lot of work that goes into even getting to the starting line, which is, okay, now I'm actually going to start and travel. But it was around the age of like 31, 32. And I was just kind of like calling upon the past memories of traveling around the world and going to different countries and having different experiences and wanting to like feel that feeling all the time.
So I want to first emphasize, you mentioned that you hating your job was obviously the kind of foundation for this entire thing. You mentioned this before we started recording. I thought it was a really interesting take that it's better to hate your job than it is to like your job. Can you kind of
I kind of came up with the theory exactly that, I was really grateful that I hated my job. And I think if you hate your job, it's better than liking your job. And just hear me out on this. I think if you hate your job, it's going to give you the chance to kind of admit that and then figure out and push you to do something and figure out something that it is you're passionate about, or at least something that you want to be doing that isn't that. And that was my case. Like, I really, really genuinely disliked my job. It was kind of the Bill Murray Groundhog Day. Like, every day was the same thing, the same routine. And even though I was getting paid pretty well and there were some nice perks, I just didn't enjoy it. But I always say, like, I'd much rather hate it than like it, because if you like your job, that's kind of scary because you don't really love your job, but you don't hate your job and you just kind of like it. And maybe you're going to ride that wave for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And before you know it, that's your whole career. So I never wanted to be in the like zone. And the same thing even with the traveling that I was doing, which we'll get to in a minute. Like, I always want to be in the love or the hate zone. I don't want to be in that middle zone because that's just kind of, the status quo. So I think hating my job is really the thing that propelled me to really alter and change my life.
Yeah. I think fear is such a motivating force for everybody. And when you're giving up a job that you like, you can talk yourself into so many fearful situations. I'm not going to be able to find a better job. Like if I want to go do the things that I want to do, I'm going to run out of money and then I'm going to be in an even worse position. So yeah, I think that that's a really sage way of putting it. It's better to hate your job than it is to like it. Cause yeah, people can get trapped in that for decades, as you mentioned. So you mentioned that you were getting paid pretty well through your corporate job, but I also know that a major theme of your travel was to get around, obviously, with public transportation and using your bartering skills. Was that mostly just to extend the travel for as long as possible? Did you like the fun challenge of it? Can you explain kind of how your finances and the philosophy of the travel itself interface with one another?
Yeah, and just because I was getting paid pretty well doesn't mean that I had any savings. That was actually the problem. So I didn't have a lot of money. So like I was living in South Beach, and I was living in a nice condo, driving a nice car. So I was pretty much living paycheck to paycheck, and that's why I gave myself 1 year before I left to travel to save as much money as I possibly could. And the biggest thing I did was I downsized my life. So I went from a nice 1 bedroom to a kind of not so nice studio apartment, and then ultimately to like a really ratty studio apartment. And I just tried to save as much money as I could. I actually took a second job where I was teaching high school economics online, so I could do that at night when I was done working during the day. So I had this goal of let me try to save $25,000. And I always love to talk about money because I think it's just super important. People think you left and traveled the world with $2 million. And I started with $0 in my bank account. And I ended up trying to save $25,000 by working 2 jobs over the course of a year. And in terms of traveling around the world the way that I was going to do it, I knew that that would never be enough money to make it all the way around the world. Like $25,000, if you're traveling and staying in hotels and eating and taking buses or ships or whatever the case may be, that can go pretty quick. You can make it last a long time, but it also can go pretty quick. And so I ended up coming up with this idea before I left was, let me try and actually barter my way around the world, which I had no experience in any of the things that I'm about to explain. But what I ended up doing was, in order to save money, is let me just not spend any money and try to barter my room and board. So I started with that. And my idea was, okay, let me email all the hotels in whatever city I'm going to next. So my starting point was Cape Town, South Africa. So even though I made it around the world without flying, technically I flew to Cape Town. That was my starting point, and then no more flights, and I made it all the way back around. But like 2 weeks before I left, I had built this little rinky-dink travel blog, and there were a couple pictures on there that I had taken of Miami Beach. There were a couple little videos I shot just with my basic camera, and there were 2 little travel writing stories. And I put this email together and I sent it to every hotel in Cape Town saying, hey, if you check out my website, check out my travel blog, check out my photography, if you let me come and stay for free for a week, in exchange, I'll make a video for you. I'll take pictures of your rooms, of your restaurant, of your hotel, and you can use those on whether it's your website or TripAdvisor. And I'll be honest with you, I never, ever thought it was going to work. My actual plan to make it initially was to do couch surfing, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. I was going to try to do couch surfing all the way around. And this was just kind of like, let me throw this out there. So I emailed 100 hotels in Cape Town. Never thought I'd hear back because my travel blog was just so rinky-dink. And lo and behold, the next morning, it was actually a miracle. 3 hotels had accepted my offer. And I really honestly could not believe it. And that really sparked something inside me, because I knew that if this worked with just no website and no portfolio and hardly any background in this, I knew that if I could get it to work in Cape Town, now I can just repeat that process. And that's exactly what I did. So I ended up, when it was all said and done, I ended up doing that with over 200 hotels, and very rarely ever having to pay for a hotel room the full 3 years of traveling around the world. And then, we can get to this in a minute, but it spawned into cruises and, tours and other different things along the way. But in terms of why I did it, it was just because I didn't have enough money. Like, who would have enough money to travel around the world kind of unlimited? Not many people. So it was just try to extend the travel, like you had mentioned, and then just to make it work, just how can I do this huge around the world trip with very little money?
And did you say that before you left, you didn't actually have any of the bartering skills that you were offering to these companies that you were outreaching?
I had never done a photo shoot ever. I did one photo shoot, and it was of a music festival, and that was for free. And it was Ultra Music Festival in Miami, which it was insane, 100,000 people, very overwhelming. And the only pictures on my portfolio were Miami Beach lighthouses and lifeguard stands at sunrise, because I would go and practice every morning at sunrise because I was working 2 jobs. So the only chance I had to practice my photography was early in the morning. And those shots are the only ones that were on my travel blog. So I was always like mortified, like these people are going to see this, and who would ever reply to this guy with no background? So I had never done a hotel photo shoot or anything like that. I didn't have a single hotel picture on my website. And lo and behold, 3 hotels, said yes. And then through that process, of course, you build a portfolio, and, you have some shots that you can at least, put on your website now that are hotel specific. But at first there were absolutely zero, not even anything with a film or photos or even any writing as well.
So how did you teach yourself?
So I started with the photography. And so this is also a great story, because I just took the Photography 101 course at Miami-Dade Community College. It was basically like a $150 course, and I forgot to read the course description. So I go into the course the first night, and the teacher asked me, "Where's my camera?" And I'm thinking, I didn't realize we needed a camera. And like, obviously I'm, kind of a moron. Everybody else has this big, shiny, new DSLR camera sitting on their desk. And I'm like, I pull out my iPhone. At the time, it was an iPhone 4. So I pull out my iPhone 4, and I'm like, well, his name was Johnny. I'm like, Johnny, I'm going to use this. And everybody kind of laughed at me. And again, this turned out to be a real blessing in disguise, because I'm sure you know this, but DSLR cameras can be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. You buy a lens, it's another $2,000. And at the time, remember, I don't have enough money to, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And so this is right when I'm starting to work 2 jobs. So I eventually scrape enough money together. But it isn't until I finished Photography 101 and Photography 201 with just my cell phone, and then I'm able to buy a camera. But what I wanted to say real quick is it was such a blessing to use the iPhone 4 compared to what my classmates had, because it forced me to tap into my creativity. Because, like, think of Rocky when he's out in the mountains in Siberia training for a fight against Drago, and he's got to use all of, like, he's chopping wood and he's running up mountains, and Drago's in this beautiful fitness center pumping perfect weight and everything. Yeah. And so I'm just, forcing myself to tap into my creativity and work harder and look at photography from a whole different perspective, because I have inferior equipment. And it really helped me learn that photography is not about the camera you have, but it's kind of the way you see something and the angle in which you see it. And my teacher at the community college on the first night said something that was really, really powerful. He said, here's a desk. You see a desk. Everybody sees a desk, but a photographer sees possibilities. And in that moment, that's what photography became to me. Like, if you can look at something just a little bit different than everybody else, or from just a different angle, that desk could be a beautiful photo, or could, whatever it might be. And so it ended up being this really great kind of blessing to have inferior equipment, because it really helped me tap into my creativity at the beginning.
That's pretty interesting. So I've also thought about, because I do some wedding videography, and I've done wedding photography, and I've also built websites. So I've actually thought about that in terms of with websites now, if you go on Wix or Squarespace, it's so easy to make one really quickly. And a lot of those places don't need anything super complicated or that would take a lot of customization. So I've thought about doing that. It's really cool to hear that you actually did do it. How far were you booking places out? Was it a year in advance you're emailing, or was it for the next week?
No. So, and this is the crazy thing too, guys, is none of this was planned. So when I got to Cape Town, believe it or not, I didn't know where I was going next. And so I had wanted to just have this incredible journey where I didn't know where I was going and how I was going to get there, but I didn't want to plan anything. And that ended up being obviously very scary, because now I don't know where I'm going next, but I was never too far out in advance. So when I would get to Cape Town, then I would look at the cities that were, a 6, 7, 8, 9 hour bus ride away. And then I would pull up TripAdvisor, get all those emails, and I would shoot the same email out to all those hotels in whatever city was 6, 7, 8 hours away. And so I would just look at the map and point and say, okay, let me try here. And then look at the map, point here. And that's how I worked my way around the whole world. I never had anything planned. Usually I would say it was 2, maybe 3 weeks out in advance. Is when I would start emailing the hotels. And then you get nervous because you're like, what if my luck has run out and nobody's going to say yes? Now I'm going to have to pay for a room. How am I going to afford this? And, it was just one of those things that this is why I was, kind of destined to do this. It was like, as soon as I would, take a big step, the step, would appear. And, I'd kind of work my way up the steps. And it was honestly just one leap of faith after the next. And it was stressful. Like at times I did feel like I was kind of, homeless and thinking like, how am I going to get this next hotel? And ultimately, though, really fortunate that it worked out each stop along the way, even in like little remote places where there was maybe 3 hotels in like in Africa, like around like Lake Malawi, there's not many hotels. And so it just so happened that at least one everywhere I would go would always say yes, but it wasn't planned out years in advance. It wasn't planned out months in advance. And one of the big issues I ran into, which is in my book, is a big section of my book, is that I wasn't able to cross a lot of the borders I had intended on because I didn't have the proper visas and paperwork ahead of time. So there was definitely challenges the way that I did it, and it wasn't planned out very well at all.
What was your success rate in terms of reaching out to hotels, for instance? And I've got to imagine that just by the nature of how many times you outreach people, your pitch got better. You started to learn what worked and what didn't. I'm curious to also learn some of the insights about what goes into a good pitch for what you were trying to do.
Yeah, no, my pitch, to be honest, didn't change very much from the very beginning until the end. Like it was a very simple email. It was only a couple lines. And I actually, anytime somebody wants to see it, I always send it to them because I want people to do this. And I've also kind of coached some other people in the photography travel industry that wanted to do this. And they've just replicated that letter and they've traveled the same way I did. So it is definitely a very short, simple letter. It's just introducing myself. And here's a link to my website and my social media sites. And these are the dates that I'll be in town. If it works for you, please let me know. And I would email every hotel. So I would go from a 5-star hotel all the way down to your hostels. And so it just depended on how many were in the city. One of the things about me is just kind of, I'm super determined. So I was just not going to say, oh, let me try 10 hotels and hope one says yes. I was going to beat them down with 10 emails until somebody replied, I would say if I emailed 100 hotels, 2 or 3 would say yes. And then what I would do is if 3 said yes, I would space them out and stay a week at one, then a week at the next, and a week at the next. So let's say in Buenos Aires, I stayed 6 weeks because I had 6 hotels, or in Rio de Janeiro or in Singapore. So normally I would say it would be 2 or 3, 4 hotels out of 100. And it could range anywhere from a 5-star hotel. So I did work with a couple 5 stars that accepted my offer, and it worked with hostels as well. So I would say on average, though, it was mostly kind of your 3 to 4 star boutique independent hotels. So it wasn't ever the big chain hotels because they have their own corporate photographers, but it was most of the time 3-ish 4-star hotels. And depending on where I was at, it just send as many as you can.
So I know you took the photography classes, but did you ever feel like any sort of imposter syndrome while you were doing this?
Oh, I still do. Yeah. So like I just published a book, and I think imposter syndrome is such a huge thing, especially when you start something later on in life. Like I was never a writer. I actually used to have to go to Sylvan Learning Center. And the only reason I got into college, which you guys can't tell, but because I'm sitting down, but I'm 6'10". So I got a full basketball scholarship. If it wasn't for that, like I was not getting into just not even the college I went to, but any college. And so I was not a good writer. I never had any creative skills. And so, of course, like imposter syndrome is such a huge thing. And like you mentioned earlier, Zach, kind of fear, the fear of failing at those things has definitely been a motivator. But even with releasing a book, there's still like this very weird feeling like, and I write about this in the book at one point, I'm crossing into the United Kingdom, and the immigration officer asked me what my job is. And I lied and I said, I'm a teacher. And I'm like, why am I lying? Like, I'm not a teacher. I haven't been a teacher for like 5 years, And it was that imposter syndrome where like, I couldn't say I'm a writer, I'm a photographer, I'm a filmmaker. Even though I've been doing those things now on the road for about a year, I couldn't get those words out of my mouth. And it caused a big problem because he thought I was lying. He's like, well, where do you teach at? I'm like, well, I'm on a sabbatical. And it turned into this whole big thing at the border where like, why are you lying about who you are or what you're trying to become? And there's a lot of insecurities that go along with it. And so, yeah, you definitely feel that way. And I think it made me work that much harder. I think with the photography, like when I would work for a hotel, even if it was a hostel, I would work so hard and try to get so many great shots for them that it was like it was a 5-star hotel. And same with writing this book. Like I worked so hard on the book. I made sure there was no punctuation errors. I hired 2, 3, 4 editors. We did 8 proofs before we got it, on Amazon and all that kind of stuff. So I think for me, that imposter syndrome has created this really great work ethic to, grind through what maybe my talent lacks. I'm going to kind of make up for that deficiency with just like work ethic and determination.
Did the pitch get easier or have a higher success rate once you started to build your portfolio out?
No, I think it just worked pretty consistently. You would think so. Like you would think that would be the case, but it just worked pretty consistently throughout. And I think the reason why was, if a hotel isn't using a room and they know they're not going to use that room and they can have somebody come and maybe offer something in exchange for that room, might as well just take it. Then I could be wrong, but that was my thinking. And, my pitch stayed very similar throughout. It worked the same amount of time. One thing I will say that as I did become a better photographer and I did build a better portfolio, in some of the nicer, more well-off countries, I did add a fee in addition to, asking for a free room and board. So like when I got to Australia or in Singapore, for instance, was the first time I did this, I would ask for $300 also in exchange for my work. So there were times where I was actually traveling, doing this, bartering, and also making money or fee off of the photography. So it did change in that sense, but I only would send those emails out once a hotel had accepted my regular free offer. I didn't want to scare all the hotels off in, say, Sydney by sending this, you got to pay me $300. I was going to make sure I got at least 1 or 2 hotels for free first, and then the next 50 emails are all going to be for $300, or whatever the case may be.
And you also mentioned that you bartered your skills as a photographer, but additionally, you also used your skills as a writer and filmmaker. Was that part of the pitch up front, or did that kind of evolve as the trip went on?
No, that was kind of part of the pitch up front too. I didn't really do any writing, to be honest. Like that was never seemed to be much of a need for the hotels, but I did do a lot of videos. So I made a ton of videos. Actually, I think for every hotel, I pretty much always did photos and a video. I don't think any hotel said, no, we don't want a video. So I would say like 95% of the time I was doing a video along with the photos. And then I would always try to edit, or I always did edit everything and turn it around before I would leave for the next hotel. So like the day before I would check out, I would sit down with the managers and we'd go through the photos and the video, and I'd, pass them over on a hard drive or whatever. And, that was kind of my routine.
That just makes me want to do it even more. Like back to that opening question of what movie inspires you to want to go outside. Like this podcast makes me want to start sending those emails again.
And I promise you, and I will send you the email, like anybody that wants to,
Please.
Anybody that wants the email, you guys can find, go to my website, traveltall.com, or hit me up on Instagram or whatever. I love sending it to people because I love hearing people say, oh my God, this worked. Like, you're right. It's not that complicated. And so the way that I actually did it, the nuts and bolts of it is I would go to TripAdvisor and I would look up all the hotels, and let's just stick with Cape Town. And then it doesn't give you their actual hotel email. So what you have to do is then search for that hotel, just do a quick copy, search with Google, and then on the next tab, it's going to open up right away. You go to the hotel website, you grab their contact, and it's usually info@hotel.com or whatever hotel it is. And then you just copy and paste that in, and I would fire these emails off. I would probably get through 100 in like 3 hours. And it was just a really quick routine. But yeah, I love when people do it because it's proof that you don't have to be rich, or you don't have to have this crazy portfolio or this, 100,000 followers to just be able to do it. And I always share this story too, is that offer whatever it is you're good at. You may not be a photographer. I wasn't a photographer, but I met this guy traveling in Africa who was bartering his electrical skills. He was an engineer, and he was rewiring like the lighting system at some of these hotels in exchange for like a month's worth of room. So, use whatever it is you're good at. If you're a personal trainer, offer to do, free training sessions for the people in the hotel. If you're a chef, offer to cook, some meals or do something. Or if you're a painter, paint murals at hostels. Like, there's just so many things you can offer. It doesn't have to be film and photography. And, I think whatever you're good at or whatever you're interested in, that's going to shine through in your message, your email, and, do the things you enjoy doing, because you're going to end up having to do it. So you might as well do stuff you like.
Me and Zach we actually did do this, Zach. I don't know if you remember this, but we did this when we did our road trip. That's how we got our helicopter.
Yeah. I don't know if us is the correct term. I was actually going to ask Chance, you mentioned wanting to send emails bartering like your photography or website building, but wouldn't it be a million times easier to just Instagram influence?
Yeah, but like if I've done wedding videography and wedding photography and feel imposter syndrome over sending those types of emails, me sending an email being like, "Hi, I have 28,000 followers. Want some advertising?" Like, I feel like such a dweeb saying that, and it works. Like I have done it. Like I exchanged photography and promotions for a tourism company in Utah. I did it with a glamping spot in Utah, and we did it with the helicopters. And like, so I know it works, but part of me is also just like, I feel like I'm conning these people.
Guys, I think this works better because I've done the influencer thing too. Like, I was able to build a social media following, and like none of these hotels ever cared about me doing anything on social media. Now, this was before or right around the time when Instagram stories became really popular. But like, if you're offering like a skill, I think that's sometimes more valuable than being an influencer. And I personally would not go to hotels and do the influencer angle. I would come at them with my skill, because that could be something that they can use in the long run. Like, photos can go on their website forever, or TripAdvisor, or a video can be replayed many times. What an influencer can do, sure, it's great. But I think if you come with something that could be a little bit more long-term beneficial, they're 100%, I shouldn't say 100%, but they're going to be a lot more likely to reply. I never went with the influencer angle, even though I had like 50,000 followers on Twitter and Instagram. That wasn't really even mentioned in my message, because when I did, nobody really brought it up.
Yeah. Right. Like, I feel like people don't care too much about just that. Like with the glamping place in Utah, I think the thing that works best when I've offered it is I have 2 different drones. So I'll offer drone footage.
Yes.
I use those for the weddings. Like, that's what gets me in the weddings, is I have drones, and I can take drone footage of your reception area or whatever, or the venue. But with the glamping spot in Utah, it was like, dude, I can fly this drone over your glamping tents, like get all kinds of cool shots, and I'll send them to you, and like you can use them for whatever you want. And I felt better doing it like that, because it was not just like, hey, I'll make a post. It was like,
drones would crush it if you travel internationally, because people don't have drones internationally as much as we have them here. And I've always said, if I ever do something like this again, I'm going with the drone angle, because now I have 2 drones. At the time, I didn't have any drones. And like, their hotels' eyes will light up if you can offer anything with, whether it's photos with the drone or video with the drone or both. That is the number one thing I think will work over any sort of influencer or anything. From my experience, drones are the way to go.
Cool.
The other thing that I think has potential drawbacks about using at least exclusively the influencer angle is that at a certain point, people are just going to stop listening to you. Like, if all you're doing is selling them, people are going to tune you out, because they just see you as a walking advertisement. I still get Facebook messages from people that I went to high school with. Like, they'll give me like a very kind of just like a simple dry chat, and then like I'll be like, yeah, cool, nice to talk to you, I haven't talked to you in 20 years, and then they'll be like, here's my pyramid scheme, do you want to get involved? And it's like, oh my god.
Yeah, we had a couple of people that got into those, and it's kind of funny to watch.
It's you're selling your own soul to do a thing, and I feel like Instagram influencing can be in that same vein. Not necessarily has to be, but it can be.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is still new enough where it feels very strange to do.
All right, let's talk about this adventure. I think the pitch that you did is really interesting, and I think there'll be some very concrete takeaways, but I want to talk adventure. So you mentioned that you started off in Cape Town. Kind of walk us through the beginning and like how you chose what your next destinations would be, and just some of the highlights from the early part of this trip.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's just so many different parts of this journey. So, when I initially started out, my goal was to get from Cape Town to Cairo. So, I wanted to go across, start in Africa. I wanted to cross all of Africa. And I literally used just public transportation the entire way. So, just your little local unair conditioned tin can buses that got flat tires constantly, engines exploded constantly, ran out of gas constantly. And it actually took me 8 months to get from Cape Town to Cairo. Now, I wasn't trying to go fast, but it was Africa is a lot bigger in person than it looks on a map. And so it was very, very slow going. Um, and this is a big part of my book as well, but I initially was traveling with my girlfriend at the time. And so her and I were trying to travel together for the first time ever. It was a kind of a new relationship, and I'm trying to quit my corporate career and become creative. And so the beginning of the book really kind of goes into that relationship where we're kind of, going back and forth. Is this going to work out? How am I going to balance the travel with the relationship, with these three new types of creativity that I'm trying to tap into as an adult for the first time? And so unfortunately, like, we had this really, really tearful goodbye at a Tanzanian airport, where she left after 3 months. And so she flew to Thailand, and then I kind of continued on alone. So the beginning of the journey, there were 3-4 months where I was actually traveling with her, and it was just close quarters, and it was just too many things for me to try to balance all at once. And as soon as she left, things got like super, super serious in terms of the dangers associated with traveling across Africa. Like, I moved right from Tanzania into Kenya, and then I was trying to go from Kenya to Ethiopia, and that's when I realized I can't get the visa to get into Ethiopia. So I can't get the visa to keep going forward. The only direction I can go is sideways. So I had to go west, and I had to go to Uganda for 40 days. And I was without my passport for 40 days. I actually mailed my passport back to my parents in the States, and they had to I filled out the paperwork ahead of time, but they had to send in to the Ethiopian embassy, the Sudanese embassy, and the Egyptian embassy, because I had to get all those visas in the States, and obviously I wasn't in the States. So there was 40 days in Uganda where I didn't have my passport, so that was a little sketchy. And at that time, there were multiple terrorist attacks that were happening. So there's a terrorist group called Al-Shabaab, and they're in Somalia, which is East Africa. And they had a lot of issues with specifically Kenya, and then also Uganda. So there was a couple different attacks right where I was at in Uganda, and they were actually out looking for Westerners. That was kind of the big warning, is like, don't go out in public if you're a Westerner, because this is a very, very dangerous time. And now I don't have my passport, so I couldn't fly even if I wanted to. So I was kind of stuck there. And eventually I got my passport back, and I'm like, okay, great. Like, now I can kind of get to Ethiopia and, get there safely. And as soon as I'm starting to go back to Nairobi, which is Kenya, to get to Ethiopia, there's the Garissa State University attack, which killed 178 people, I believe it was. And it was I think it was like the second worst terrorist attack in Africa of all time. And just really, really gruesome terrorist attack. And the way that I had to get to Ethiopia, the only way you could go was kind of through that region where the terrorist attack just happened. And so now there's these crazy warnings out for Westerners, Americans. We really shouldn't be there, kind of out and about. It was just a very dangerous time in Kenya to begin with. And now you have these terrorist attacks, and you have this group from Somalia, this terrorist group in the region. And so now I have to get on a 24-hour bus ride to go through that very region. And, it was a really, really trying time, because I'm only doing this because it was my dream, to go around the world without flying. And it was a really seminal moment, because it was like, well, why don't I just get on an airplane and fly from Uganda to wherever I want to go, And I decided to really just kind of double down on my dream at that moment. I was like, no, like, I've quit too many things in my life. I'm really genuinely willing to risk it here. I'm going to get on this bus. And this is a big part of the book, is kind of, summoning the courage to actually get on this bus and deciding to do it. And then it's this really grueling 24-hour bus ride, which is normally a dangerous bus ride. But eventually, kind of, thankfully, I made it to Ethiopia, and then on to Sudan, and then up to Cairo. But it was a really long journey using public transportation. There was not one bus that was air conditioned the whole time. You know, it's like 100 degrees in there. I've got some great stories about some of the passengers. You know, there was this one couple that sat in Mozambique. They sat on it like an 8-hour bus ride with the stainless steel kitchen sink on their laps for like 8 hours, you know, and it's just like you see people just living their life, and that's how they get around in Africa. And it's just, you know, one woman had a bag of chickens under her seat, and one of the times they were just clucking too loud, and she reached down and like snapped their necks right on the bus, you know, like just absolutely insane stuff was happening. And, you know, I feel like I really got to see the real Africa in a sense, and, you know, travel like locals do. But through that, there's a lot of danger. It's a long journey. It's not comfortable, but it was definitely worth it in the long run.
So I imagine laying low as a Westerner is especially difficult when you're 6'10".
Right. So I'm 6'10". I've got like tattoos all over my arms, and, you know, I stand out here. So when you're in Uganda, there's not many white people, to be honest, and there's nobody 6'10". And yeah, I definitely stood out. I didn't feel safe. You weren't supposed to be going to, you know, malls and things like that, or restaurants or whatever. So I was laying pretty low at that point, because I was definitely, you know, genuinely concerned about my safety. And I'm not one to be like overly paranoid. I don't like to watch the news and think, oh, the worst is going to happen. I'm super optimistic in terms of, you know, travel warnings and things. Like, I'm going to go no matter what. But this was the first time in my life I was like genuinely like, I don't feel safe going to the store, you know? And it was definitely a life-changing experience, because it made me really tap into, why am I doing this? You know, finding the courage and not quitting and continuing on. Because the same situation happened in Egypt. I had to cross through the Sinai Peninsula, which is one of the most dangerous parts of the world. And that bus ride was so dangerous. It was the only bus I was ever on that wasn't completely full. There was only 6 other people on the whole bus, and it was a 30-hour bus ride. So it was me and 6 other people crossing the Sinai Peninsula during a very dangerous time to be in the Sinai Peninsula, because I had to get to the Middle East to get to Europe. I couldn't just go from Egypt across the Mediterranean. There were no ships. So I had to go to Israel.
So you mentioned that these bus rides are dangerous. Can you be a little bit more, or can you go into some detail about what the risks would be?
Yeah. So specifically in Kenya, when you get to the border in Kenya, there's just these groups of bandits, because the border converges. You've got Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. And so the buses are kind of, I don't want to say normally attacked, but often attacked from a different group of bandits, because it's all barren wilderness. So you've got, you know, 15 hours where you're just on literally a dirt road. And the roads are so bad that the bus has a metal bar over your knees for you to hold on, because you're literally riding on dirt and potholes and gravel for 15 straight hours, 20 straight hours. But I mean, I've just heard horror stories of people that have been on buses that were hijacked, and, you know, they're hijacked at gunpoint. You know, and I don't want to say Africa is super dangerous, because, you know, walking down the wrong street in America can also be dangerous at the wrong time of the day. So I'm not trying to pin this all on Africa, because I also did meet a ton of awesome people. But it was just, you know, you're just in a different country, different continent, and you stick out. And, you know, I've got camera equipment, so, you know, people that could be kind of a draw to, you know, to people. So just overall, you know, you just have to be careful, because some of those bus rides, they do get hijacked, and, you know, they'll take your money and your passports. And there's a couple incidences where one of the hotels that I had just left in South Africa had been ransacked by a group of bandits, and they rounded everybody up at gunpoint and took everything from them. And I had just left there like a week before. So thankfully, I just missed all of these really, really terrible things by a day or two, or sometimes a week. So, you know, it was just kind of the risk involved.
Were there ever any like parts of those risky trips where you had like any instances happen that made you think like, oh shit, like something might be happening? Like when you went through that Egypt part, that sounds like a long drive. Like were there ever any times that things happened during it?
Yeah. I mean, so you are on these buses for 20, 30 hours, and so yeah, there's things that you're always looking over your shoulder and you're always wondering, like, what is that, who's that, what's that? And but nothing ever really stood out where I was at in terms of the danger. Thankfully, every bus ride ended up being okay, but I was just kind of got tired of looking over my shoulder a lot. That was it. So nothing actually hit me kind of in the face and was coming directly towards me. Thankfully I am a big guy and I do feel like I could probably defend myself if I had to, but if somebody has a gun, it doesn't matter how big you are. There was a lot of boarding buses in the middle of the night. That would always feel very dangerous. For whatever reason, the buses that I seem to board left at like 2:30 in the morning, which is the worst time to get on a bus in Nairobi and get on a bus in, wherever. It's always like you're waiting in the middle of the darkness and just hoping the bus shows up, and then you get on and you don't know where you're going or who's on it. So, just a lot of trust in the universe at that point. And thankfully it paid off, and I always got to where I needed to go.
So through this part of the trip, obviously you can't stand out too much, or you have to try to hide that as much as you can. But are you doing anything for recreation, or is it purely just point A to point B?
No, so I was definitely trying to do some stuff, early on in Africa. But when I did get to Uganda and Kenya, like those specifically, I wasn't really doing a whole lot of recreational stuff. One of the things I was always interested in was great white sharks. So I actually worked with the South African Shark Conservancy, and I went and spent 2 weeks with them doing the same thing. I just bartered with them. I stayed in the house where their interns were, and in exchange, I made a video for their website. And so it was really awesome because I wanted to just go and swim with great white sharks. So like that's what we did, and I made this really cool video for them with the sharks, and then some of the research that they do. And so there was different things like that. One of my favorite things to do while traveling is to go to like a sporting event. So I love going to soccer games. So I try to go, like in Tanzania, I would go to like a local soccer match, and so. I definitely try to do that. I like to go and have a couple beers. So I would always, on a Saturday, try to go find a cool spot to hang out. But in terms of like recreation, I wasn't looking for like touristy things to do, because I'm also, trying to like write this blog. I'm trying to do my own photos. I'm trying to do my own videos. I'm trying to then also do the photos and the videos for the hotel. At the time, I was trying to balance a relationship, and then I'm trying to do some fun stuff on the side. So the time ended up going pretty quick, because you're also exhausted from these bus rides after 30 hours. You need like a day to, like, jet lag, really. You need like a day to kind of like bounce back. And then I'm also trying to work out because I want to live my normal life as well. So I'm trying to, get a workout in some days or go for a run. And you're also buying groceries some places because you want to cook, and you're tired of eating, in a restaurant. So there's just normal day-to-day things that you do, which are fun. Like I like going to the grocery store in different countries and picking out what food I'm going to eat for the week. I always thought that was kind of a fun thing to do.
So what happened after Egypt? Where did you go once you got there?
Yeah, so I actually ran out of real estate, and this is a big part of the book, is that I just assumed you could cross the Mediterranean Sea from Egypt on a ship and get to, like, I don't know, Italy or Greece. And all the ships, because it was so dangerous at this time, it was in 2015, so it was a pretty dangerous time. All of the cruise ships had stopped sailing from Egypt to Europe. So there was no way for me to get across the Mediterranean. And the only option was to get on a bus, like I said, to go across the Sinai Peninsula and into Jordan. And so I went into Jordan, which is a great country. And then I crossed from Jordan into Israel. And then in Israel, the only ship that I could find that would take people from Israel to any part of Europe was actually a cargo ship. And so that was my first experience getting on a cargo ship. And just like a regular cruise ship, you buy a ticket and you're on, and you're just a passenger. And I think there were 3 or 4 other people on the cargo ship that were normal people, and the rest was all cargo and the crew. And so we crossed the Mediterranean Sea for 5 days, and it dropped me off in Greece. And then just real quick, I'll kind of go through the route. So I just kind of circled around Europe for a little bit, and I made it to London. And London was the 1-year mark on the road, and I was like really getting tired because I was moving kind of every week, and it had been 1 year, and I just needed a break. And so I bartered with a hotel, really awesome hotel in Whitechapel, which is in London. And I told the guy what I was doing, and he gave me, like 5 nights for free in exchange for the photos. But then he also said, well, you can stay here for 2 months and just pay rent. And he gave me like this super cheap deal that I would have been a fool to pass up, because London is obviously a very expensive city. And I think it was just a couple $100. So I was like, miracle, thank you, because I need to stop moving for a minute. And so I stayed in London for about 10 weeks. And then, that's kind of where I regrouped and before I headed off to Russia.
How do you keep yourself entertained? Did you say it was 5 days on that cargo ship?
Oh, that's nothing, man. We didn't even get to the long cargo ship journeys yet. I crossed the Pacific Ocean, which was 30 days at sea on a cargo ship. So that one, no, cargo ships are not fun. They're miserable experiences. People that love to travel, we kind of like think and romanticize them, like, oh, that'd be fun. Let me try to, go across the ocean on a cargo ship. And it's fun for like the first 24 hours. And then you're like, okay, now what? And you're just on the ship, and it's not a very comfortable ride. The ships are rocking, and it's just, there's no TV, there's no Wi-Fi, there's really no people to talk to. The crew's pretty miserable. They're working the whole time. They live on that thing for 9-10 months a year. And it was just a rough experience. The Mediterranean one went quick because it was only 5 days. But if we talk about the Pacific Ocean crossing, that was one of my least favorite times of the whole journey.
I don't want to jump ahead, but just as a teaser for myself, were there any huge storms, like big waves?
Yeah, so it actually, there were, and it got delayed. We got delayed leaving Sydney, because I left from Sydney and it was going to Oakland, and there was a huge, huge storm that got us delayed for like, I think it was 2 or 3 days in Sydney. And eventually when we left, the first day was a really big swell, and, just miserable. Like, you can't sleep. The boat is just rocking side to side. And eventually then it, like, we passed the swell and it was fine. But when we talk about going to Antarctica, I was on a ship that crossed the Drake Passage, which is the most dangerous, volatile sea in the whole world. And that was miserable. That, just the seasickness alone, most of the people on the ship were not in good shape. Yeah.
I want to kind of drill down on some of the stories from your time in Europe, because I feel like we kind of yada to the London time. Yeah. So how long were you in Europe, and any standout stories from there?
Yeah, so when I first got to Europe, my parents actually came to visit me. My parents came to visit me in Greece. So we kind of spent, some time together in Greece, and there's a great part of my book because one of my friends left a comment like, oh, it's really nice that your parents are paying for your trip around the world. And I was just like, kind of sent me into this like rage. Like, I just crossed Africa, like busted my butt, bartering my work. And like, you think, oh, because I posted a picture on Facebook with my parents in Greece, that they're paying for this whole around the world journey, because people just don't realize, like, they think, it's, somebody's paying for this. Like, it's just impossible to travel around the world this way. And, so I kind of took this, it's not a funny story, but in the book, it's a very serious story. But I kind of like took that anger out of my parents and ended up kind of storming away in Santorini with all of my things. And I had to like go on the spot, and I was showing up in hotels. Like, there were only like 2 or 3 hotels in the neighborhood where we were. And, I'm trying to barter, like stressed out, just like a child, like ran away from my parents, like with all my things. I'm like, I'm mad at you. And, I'm trying to barter, face to face for the first time ever. And the first hotel says, no way. And, the next hotel says no. And then eventually, like, I just kind of dip into this determination and get them to say yes. And so, I mean, there's some very interesting stories in terms of, family dynamics there. And then as I got to London, the thing that really jumped out there is that I started really missing and wanting to be with the woman, the girlfriend that had left in Tanzania. And so I had this idea in London, like, okay, I'm going to, reconnect with her. I'm going to email her, and we're going to meet in Beijing. We're going to meet in China in 2 months. And, I'm going to make sure that, like, I don't screw this up this time. So I email her, and, a lot of that time is kind of going back and forth and hoping she'll come back and rejoin me on the journey. And eventually she says no. And, you kind of go through this heartbreak a second time, and you're out there kind of on your own. Like, what am I even doing? Like, I'm arguing with my parents, this woman doesn't want to see me again. And so there was definitely a time where I was kind of like losing my mind a little bit in Europe. So, that's why I really needed a place to stop and stay in London, because it was just like everything, traveling amplifies your emotions. I say this all the time, like, the good, the bad, like everything is just so amplified. And same with chasing a dream, and same with doing creative things. So like you put all those things together and it's like the perfect tonic for really, really high highs and really, really low lows, And so I just needed some like chill downtime in London. And then from there, I just kind of worked my way through like Germany, and then I stopped in Prague, and then I ended up going to Russia, which is where I took the Trans-Siberian Railroad from Russia, and it ends up stopping in Beijing. But I decided to make a big mistake, which is to get off in Siberia in the middle of winter, and thinking I just wanted to see Siberia, right? Like, it sounds cool. Oh, let me go check out Siberia. Never been. I'll probably never go again, right? And I'm passing through it. So I end up getting off the train in Siberia for 4 days and misreading my train ticket to get back on. And I lose, $1,000 because it's a non-refundable ticket.
Whoa.
It's the middle of winter. So it's like -5 degrees. And now I'm like scrambling to figure out like, where am I going to stay? How am I going to rebook this ticket? Because nobody spoke English at the train station, like not even a word. And everything was just so confusing. And ultimately I got on another train, which left at like 1 a.m. And when I got on the train, it was so cold that I thought the heating system in my train cabin was broken. And keep in mind, there's no one else on the train. Like, I'm the only idiot boarding a train at 1 a.m. in Siberia going to China and it's a 5-day train ride. So nobody else is on this train, maybe like one other Russian family and me. And I get into my room and like there's frost on the window. And when you like put your hand up to the window and you think the frost is on the outside, well, like the frost was on the inside of the train cabin. And I'm just like, what is going on right now? And the craziest part of that is I look at the little like rim around the window, and there's little Bible thin tissue paper tucked into it. And I look at this, like the Chinese conductor guy. I'm like, dude, this tissue paper is the insulation for the next 5 days for Siberian wintertime. So like it was basically a freezing cold, literally freezing cold train car. And I had to sleep with 4 blankets, all my clothes on, put all my shirts on, my sneakers on. I pulled my hat over my eyes and slept like that for like 3 or 4 days, and eventually warmed up the last like day or two. But crossing Russia in wintertime, in hindsight, not a good decision.
I guess that kind of raises the question, are you just traveling with a backpack? Is that all you have, is one backpack worth of stuff?
Yeah. So I was listening to the one podcast you guys did about the gear wish list, and I was just kind of laughing because the bag that I actually used, like I never liked backpacks, like nice, the fancy backpacks. I always thought like if I'm going to go backpacking, like those just look uncomfortable. And so again, the theme of money is I didn't have a lot of money. And so the bag that I bought was actually at Ross, which is a discount store. And I bought a bag in the clearance aisle at Ross. And so it was literally like a $12 bag, and it had wheels on it. So like inline skate wheels and a handle. And I always just thought like it's much easier to roll something than it is to carry something. So I just had a roller bag the whole time. And then I did have a little camera bag, which was like a backpack, which had my laptop, my regular camera, and maybe just a couple like other things in there. But I really didn't have a lot of stuff. I got rid of everything in terms of like my car, my apartment, all my furniture, all of that was gone. I didn't put anything in storage. And so all I had was just one little roller bag suitcase, and then my camera backpack.
Were you, because to go from the heart of Africa to Siberia, Russia, obviously
Right.
Those are different climate requirements. Are you buying more clothing as the trip goes on, or do you just have what you have and that's what you're doing?
Yeah, same thing. I'm just like, again, I'm unprepared, right? So I didn't have a jacket. and so I actually bartered a jacket at a sporting goods store in Belgium. I went in, and this guy was around my age, and he seemed like a cool guy. And I was like, "Hey, man, I'm traveling around the world, and I really need a jacket." And I have super long arms, and I tried on this jacket, and it was the only one in like all of Belgium that fit me. It was a double X, which there aren't many double X, and it had really long sleeves, which was a miracle. But I think it was like $250 or $300 jacket. It was really nice. And I just explained to what I'm doing. And I said, "Hey, I have this idea. If you let me take this jacket, I'll put a picture on Instagram, but I'm also going to do this. I'm going to then wear it until I don't need it. And I'm going to give it to someone that's homeless in wherever, the weather warms up at least enough for me that I don't need it, and I can give it away to somebody. And I'll write a story about how you gave it to me and then about how I gave it to someone else." So I ended up that's the only time I've ever really bartered for clothes. But it was $300 jacket. So I just kind of came up with this idea on the spot, but I never really had the clothes that I needed. I had a couple pairs of jeans. I had like two like long sleeve shirts, but it was mostly t-shirts and shorts and that kind of thing. For the most part, I was always in warm enough weather. The only time I was in really, really cold weather was in Russia in the winter, and then when I went to Antarctica. So those were the only two times it got really cold.
So who did you give the jacket to?
I gave it to a woman in Vietnam, actually. So I was like, it felt a little bit awkward because like I didn't obviously speak the language and they didn't speak English, and I didn't want to give it to somebody that didn't need it. So I was just kind of like walking around trying to find somebody that I thought maybe could use this jacket, because it was still a little bit cold where I was. And I just kind of presented it to a woman, and I don't think she really knew what exactly I was trying to explain, but she was really happy to take the jacket, and I gave it to her, and that was kind of it.
I imagine she was swimming in it.
Yeah. Well, and again, like, I mean, I didn't know if she could give it to like someone she's with or whatever. So yeah, and hey, maybe it's a blanket. I don't know.
Yeah. I also want to talk about, it's one thing to send a cold email to someone and to barter your services that way, but it takes way bigger balls to walk up to someone and ask them in person for that. Is this something that you would consider a strength before you had left for the trip, or is this a craft that you had to hone over the course of the journey?
No, I'm an introvert. So I'm an only child, and believe it or not, I'm a homebody. And so, I've never been the person that will go up to someone and I'm not it's just not in my personality. So even doing that with the bartering for the jacket, like, took a lot of something from me, that's not the kind of person I am. And I didn't really end up doing that kind of thing a lot. Like, I could have probably gone into restaurants more often or whatever, and bartered meals and things like that. But like, it just isn't in my personality to be kind of out there like that. I'm much more reserved, and I don't like, in a sense, you are kind of asking for something for free, and like, that's just not the kind of person I am. Like, I want to work for something. So it just didn't really mesh well with my personality to kind of just go up and ask for things. So I would never normally do that. And I didn't really do it that often, to be honest.
And when you did pay for stuff, let's say for food, did you ever try to negotiate? Was it, or were you, because I know especially in Europe, and I think in a lot of places in the world, that's kind of part of the culture, like especially at markets and that sort of thing, they expect you to haggle, or I should say at least haggling is a fairly normal thing.
Yeah.
Is that something that you implemented as well?
Well, so here's the thing. The great thing is all the hotels would include every time the breakfast. So like, I never paid for a breakfast in 3 years. And then if it did have a restaurant that did lunch and dinner, I would ask the hotels to include that in, or at least some of the meals. So I was really fortunate that a lot of the hotels, did have restaurants, and they would take care of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If they didn't do lunch and dinner, I had this Tupperware, and I would take enough of the breakfast and put it in my Tupperware and put it in my backpack and go back to my room. And then I'd have that for lunch. So I'm basically eating double breakfast, which is pretty cheap thing to do, but it saved a ton of money. And so I wasn't really going into restaurants and doing that too often, but I was definitely taking my lunch if I wasn't going to get it paid for, by the hotel at the breakfast. So I did that a ton, for sure.
For me, traveling, the food, the cultural experience of the food is one of the highlights for me. I'm curious, what about the traveling was enticing to you? I mean, obviously you've been to so many incredible places, but was it the people? Was it different, adventures within each stay? Was it just the act of the bartering, the fact that you were able to pull that off that was exciting to you? Like, what was the primary thread that kept you going on
So
this?
the primary thread was that I had always loved long road trips as a kid. And so I played on travel basketball teams. And I always loved just the long sitting in the minivan with your buddies, cracking jokes. And we got a 10-hour minivan ride to the next, basketball tournament. And then in college, I would go on all these road trips with my college roommates we went to all the Major League Baseball stadiums in the country. So every summer we would drive to like 3 or 4 or 5 different stadiums. So for me, the part of travel that I really liked or wanted to experience this time was to literally see the earth. So I love watching the earth and the world go by in a bus or in a train. Like, I just like sitting there and looking out the window. That to me was my favorite part. And that's the primary reason that I did it the way that I did with no flying. I had traveled a lot before, but when you fly from city to city, you don't see the inner space. You don't see like that beautiful part of the country in between the big cities. And for most part, like, European cities are all very similar. Asian cities are all very similar. Of course, they're different, but a city's a city. What's different is what it looks like between Mozambique and Malawi, what it looks like between Vietnam and Cambodia, or whatever the case may be, and what it looks like crossing Australia on the train. So I just wanted to see the landscape. That was my favorite part, is seeing how the landscape changes. I'm not much of a foodie, but I do like to try, different foods in different countries. I love sports. So like I was saying earlier, like, one of my favorite things to do is to go to a soccer match in a different country. I try to do that every chance I get. So, it was just really the act of moving and seeing the landscape. That was the number one thing. And then it became so challenging and so difficult to travel that way that it became like, I'm just going to be so determined now to finish what I started. So it became like a challenge personally, like a deep, deep challenge to see if I could actually stick with it and make it all the way around the world, because it wasn't easy. Not one of those bus rides, even in Europe, like, nothing was easy about this. Like, South American bus rides were really, really difficult. I got severe dehydration in Asia because I didn't drink water all day on a 15-hour bus ride, and it was a stupid mistake. So, none of these bus rides were easy, but at the same time, I still did enjoy them.
So I just really want to get to the boats. Selfishly, where do we go after we get to Beijing?
So I went all the way down through Asia. So, and this is a crazy story too. So as I was getting to Singapore, I had a ticket booked on a cargo ship. And I'm like 2 weeks away from Singapore, thinking, okay, this cargo ship is going to take me from Singapore to Australia, and then I can keep going. And right before I get to Singapore, I get an email from the company that booked the ticket for me. And they're like, well, they just sold the ship and all the trips are now null and void forever. And I was just like, well, how am I going to get from Asia to Australia? So I had to scramble to get from Singapore. I actually booked a cruise. So that I did have to pay for. That was one of the first big things. Besides the Trans-Siberian Railroad ticket, one of the first big things I had to pay for was a cruise from Singapore, which dropped me off in Perth, which is the western edge of Australia.
Australia. How long were you in Australia for?
And so that's when I took a train across. It sounds like this is a long explanation, but it did take 3 years. So I crossed Australia on a train. And so that's when I got on the really terrible cargo ship from Sydney to Oakland. So that's the one where you're on it for 30 days. And it's like just this massive, like the biggest cargo ships you've ever seen, with just tons of cargo. There was 20 crew members. And every day we're crossing a different time zone because we're like sailing through different time zones every day. So every day you're also like turning the clock back 1 hour. So your body's like totally out of whack. You can't sleep that well because the ship is rocking at night. There's nothing to do. The people are pretty miserable on the ship that work there. And we crossed over the international date line one day, and we actually had to turn the clocks back 23 hours. So we lived the same like Thursday twice basically. And I'll never forget what the Chinese deckhand said. He summed it up perfectly. He was like, tomorrow is today again. I was like, that's kind of genius. Like, yeah, we just literally lived the same Thursday. Tomorrow is today again. So we made one little pit stop in Tahiti, so we could get off for like 6 hours in Tahiti and kind of run around the island. But after that, it was just a straight shot to Oakland.
6 hours in Tahiti seems torturous. Like, I'd almost rather not go to Tahiti than only be able to go to Tahiti.
I read about. Yes, you nailed it. So like it was, and that's exactly the theme of what I was writing about is like, by the time you get there and you go to like a cafe, because you haven't been on your email or talked to anybody, so you want to like check your messages and you want to catch up. So like you waste 3 hours of 6 hours like trying to find Wi-Fi, and then you scramble to go to a beach and you can't really enjoy it, and it turns into this like, I was there but was I even really there kind of thing. And so at least we could get off the ship and walk around a little bit, but it went really quick. Yeah.
How was the seasickness?
On that one, like I'm pretty good with seasickness, to be honest, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, but I just typically don't get seasick, so I think I was pretty okay there. It's never really been an issue for me, thankfully.
Did you ever have a point on the trip where you thought the ship was going to go down, like on any of the ships? I'm just like, I watched a lot of TV shows recently where there's people on ships and they go through these big storms, and I just like cannot get that thought out of my head.
Right. Maybe going to Antarctica, like the waves were crazy in the Drake Passage, but I didn't ever think the ship was like going to go down. But I wouldn't, that never really crossed my mind, like that a ship was going to go down. Now you've put this thought into my head, so like I would be totally scared to go again. But no, I always felt pretty safe on the ships, to be honest. Like it was never too much of an issue. I was afraid I was going to miss the ship when we got off in Tahiti. Like I was too afraid to go too far away from the ship because I don't want to miss. How am I going to keep going if I miss the ship? So I was always panicked about like missing the buses or the trains or getting off at a rest stop, and I'd always want to be the first one back on the bus and that kind of thing.
I prefer trains to buses for that reason. Like a train has to be on the tracks, whereas buses can go anywhere. So it kind of freaks me out to take a bus, but a train, I'm like, okay, you have to be here.
You're right. Yeah. And like, this is the other thing. A lot of the buses in other countries, they don't leave until they sell every ticket. So if they say you're going to leave at 7 a.m., you get there. I get there at 6 because I'm like nervous freak. And then you sit on the bus from 6 until they sell all the tickets, which is until like 9:30. So it's like 3.5 hours of sitting on this hot bus before, and we haven't even left. They don't follow an actual schedule. So, most countries, they don't leave until every single ticket has been sold, and they'll sit there for as long as it takes.
How bad do those buses smell?
Yeah, they smell pretty bad. Yeah, they smell bad. And the windows are open. So the worst part is like all the dust comes in, and like I had to throw all my t-shirts out by the time I got to Egypt because they were just they were like caked in like this dirt and sweat that just you couldn't get clean.
Yeah. And I know some cultures use deodorant more than other cultures.
Right. And that too, like people just don't smell great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, myself probably included. I mean, I'm not out there smelling good. I'll be honest.
Oh, I smell terrible all the time.
So what does someone do in Antarctica?
So Antarctica was my favorite part of this whole journey. So just to kind of fill in the gaps. So the way that I got there was I crossed North America, so United States into Canada, and then I took a cruise ship through the Panama Canal into Chile down to Ushuaia, which is the southernmost part of Argentina. So if you look at South America, it's the very bottom point in South America. So that's how you get to Antarctica. So again, I bartered my way onto, there's only 12 at the time. I think there was 12 cruise ships that sail there. And I never, ever thought one would ever say yes, because the cheapest ticket was like $10,000. And what I'm doing is nowhere equivalent to $10,000. Like, I'm just not that good. And, I'm okay photographer, but like, I wouldn't put my value at $10,000. So I thought, no way, I have a 1 in 12 chance. And what are the odds of that is probably staggering. And thankfully, one of the cruise companies said you can go to Antarctica for free if you do some pictures and a video. I was like, no way. It was a miracle. So I made it to Ushuaia, and we got on the ship. And once you cross the Drake Passage, so getting to Antarctica takes like 4 or 5 days. And then once you get there, it's the most beautiful place on the planet, hands down. Like nothing's even close from my experience. And I don't even like cold weather. So like, that's how much I like it. And so what was beautiful about it? Okay, so the boat, the water evens out. So it's very still. It's very quiet. It's very calm once you get to Antarctica. And the boat moors in the center of, either the ocean or an inlet or wherever. And then you take these little zodiacs, these little rubber rafts to land. And there's only like 50 passengers, 60 passengers on the whole cruise. So it's not a lot of people. So you take a zodiac to land, which is maybe like say like a 10-minute little boat ride. And then you get out and you walk around and there's like a billion penguins and there's different species of penguins at different spots. So you just kind of walk amongst them. And then, there's tons of whales and seals, and the natural landscape is the thing that like really stuck out to me. I always thought, like, when I picture Antarctica, like it would be flat and no mountains and just like very gray. And it was actually the opposite. There were like these beautiful mountain peaks. We would hike to the top of mountains some days. One of the days, the best day of my whole life, was in Antarctica, and it was so warm you could actually take your jacket off. So we like threw our jackets at the bottom of this mountain, and we all hiked to the top. And it was just not a single cloud in the sky. It looked like a beach day, and it was like probably 35, 40 degrees that day. And it was just like stunningly beautiful. Now we did have really cold, like negative, 10, 20 degree days. But for whatever reason, that one single day when we were at like the most beautiful mountain peak in all of Antarctica was just a beautiful blue sky and just the landscape. You just like when you hear an iceberg like collapse, that the way the thunder that sound makes, and you don't even like know where it's coming from, is just like so powerful. And you just feel like you're in a snow globe. Like you feel like you're in a real life snow globe. You feel so far away from the rest of the world. Like it's hard to explain, but it honestly feels like you're on another planet because there's no people. There's never been a war there. There's no bloodshed. There's just like this untouched, pure, raw, like amazing place.
Yeah. What's the population of do you call it a town, a city? Like what is the place that you're actually staying? Describe that a little bit.
Well, you're staying on the ship. You stay on the ship for 2 weeks. There's no people. There's no towns. It's completely empty. So there's a couple research bases in Antarctica, but there's only a few people there, and those are not towns or anything by any means. But yeah, so you live on the ship for 2 weeks, and the ship is fun. Like these people have paid a lot of money to go on it, so it's to them it's like a cruise. So there's a bar, so people are drinking. I mean. There's like limbo contests at night. There's, it's led by scientists that are in charge of everybody on the ship. And so they're doing lectures during the day or at night. And so, there's a lot of learning going on. I mean, it's not like a crazy wild party cruise, but, there's some fun stuff that happens. But you make 2 landings a day. So every day you go on, on land once in the morning, and then the ship takes you somewhere else in the afternoon. So you have probably like 3-4 hours in the morning and then 3-4 hours in the afternoon to kind of explore, wherever it is, they stop at that day.
Well, Eric, it's impossible to condense a 3-year journey into an hour-long interview, as we are learning right now. I know we missed a ton of the highlights from your journey, but before we wrap it here, I want to know, like, if you have any general pieces of advice for somebody that's listening to this, that's interested, maybe not in following your exact footsteps, because that's obviously pretty audacious, but just in terms of taking the leap and taking on a big adventure, leaving their job that they either hate or like, and doing something big like what you did.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the number one message that I always like to pass along is that it's possible, right? So like I did all of these things with no experience, with no money, with no resources, with an iPhone and a photography course. And I parlayed that, all into these different experiences. And so, you don't have to be the most talented person. Like I'm not the most talented photographer, the most talented writer, but I'm a hard worker. And, once I kind of set this goal that I was going to make this transformation happen, I did all of the things that it required to do. And, you know, I would love for people to read the book, because the beginning of the book is how I made these changes, right? So I got rid of my TV at the time. I started reading more. I took 2 jobs. I did all of the things that most people, that when they have a dream, they don't want to do. So there was a lot of sacrifices involved. And, you know, that's a big part of my story, is the determination and how to actually do it and make it stick with inferior equipment. And I think, you know, the biggest message, you know, is that, like I keep saying, is that it is possible, and that I would really encourage people to, you know, tap into what it is, you know, your deepest dreams are. And the first thing I did was I wallpapered my room with this big vision board, which was like a world map. And I put up there photography, video, writing, save money. And then I turned my dreams into these really long to-do lists, which was sign up for photography 101, sign up for travel writing 101, build a website, take some portfolio shots, you know. And what I'm getting at is I turned my dream into goals, and then I turned my goals into very manageable to-do lists. And then you could cross them off. And eventually, if you cross them off and you work your way up or down that list, you've started to do those things that seemed very, very overwhelming at the time. Like, the biggest thing is, how am I going to travel around the world? That's so overwhelming. How am I going to do it for free? Impossible. But if you break it down, and whatever it is that you want to do, you know, and you stick with it, you know, for me, it was how did I find my dream? How did I follow my dream? And then most importantly, how did I stick with my dream and actually make it all the way around the world? So I'd love for people to pick up the book. It's called Sky's the Limit. It's on Amazon, and, you know, they can check me out, or I love to hear from people. So you can ask me as many questions as you want, and you can find me on social media at Travel Tall.
Travel Tall. That's the website and your Instagram?
Exactly. Yep. It's all traveltall.com, or Instagram, Twitter, Facebook is just Travel Tall.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thanks so much for your time. Like I said, I know obviously we left a lot of meat on the bone. It's hard to condense 3 years of adventures, but this was really inspiring, and I hope that you kick some people in the ass to follow your tracks.
Awesome, man. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you.